Hello, everyone. You're listening and watching Rashkin Report Perspectives. Subscribe to Rashkin Report on Substack. My name is Yuri Rashkin. There's a theory going around right now that actually sounds pretty smart on the surface. America is at war with Iran. America is squeezing China. America is building a fortress in the Western Hemisphere, controlling choke points, remilitarizing Japan, locking down the Strait of Malacca, cutting off the Belt and Road Initiative. The Pentagon has a document, an actual published strategy, that lays all of this out with remarkable candor. Control the world's trade routes. Force China to buy American energy in American dollars. Make America great again by making everyone else desperate again. It's an empire strategy. It's ruthless, it's coherent. And about a dozen serious analysts are presenting it as proof that Trump, whatever you think of him, is executing a genuine, grand strategy for American dominance. I want to tell you why that theory has a hole in it large enough to sink an aircraft carrier. And that hole has a name. It's Vladimir Putin. Let's start with what the strategy actually requires. To contain China, genuinely contain China, not just inconvenience it, you need to close the escape routes. Maritime routes through the Strait of Malacca, energy routes from the Middle East, financial routes through the dollar system. The theory says America controls the oceans, America destabilizes Iran, America looks down the Western Hemisphere, China runs out of options, China submits, America wins. Clean, simple, almost elegant. Except Russia shares the longest land border on Earth with China. Russia has pipelines running directly into China. Russia is currently supplying roughly 20% of China's oil, and that number is growing. Russia and China are building alternative payment systems specifically designed to bypass the dollar. Russia provides China with military technology, diplomatic cover at the UN, and a trading relationship that requires exactly zero American permission. In other words, every choke point America is spending trillions to control, Putin is quietly building a land bridge around. The maritime squeeze that's supposed to bring China to its knees? Putin is the back door that never gets locked. And here is the question that should keep every American strategist awake at night. Why doesn't Trump say anything about it? America is at war with Iran. Russia is helping Iran, not secretly, openly. Trade routes, sanctions evasion, diplomatic protection. If you're genuinely prosecuting a war against Iran as part of a strategy to control the Middle East and cut off Chinese energy, you would be furious at Putin right now. You would be calling him out daily. You would be treating Russian support for Iran as the strategic betrayal, which it is. Trump's response? Silence, warmth, phone calls described as productive, a ceasefire framework in Ukraine that asks nothing of Russia while giving up Ukrainian territory. Russia is expanding its military ties with Cuba, sitting at the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico, or America, inside what Trump calls the American Hemisphere, the zone the Monroe Doctrine was invented to protect. If Trump is serious about Western Hemisphere dominance, Cuba-Russia is a 5-alarm emergency. Trump's response? He talks about buying Greenland. You can explain one of these silences as strategic patience. You can explain two as tactical calculation. You cannot explain all of them together as anything other than a special constraint that activates specifically and only when the subject is Putin. Now, some people will tell you this is where it gets speculative, and I want to be precise here because precision matters. I am not telling you Trump wakes up every morning and takes orders from Moscow. I am telling you something more specific and more disturbing. I'm telling you that the architecture of this administration, who got hired, who got vetted, who got placed in which positions, passed through the hands of a man named Sergei Gore. Born Sergio Gorokhovsky, born in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, Soviet Union, 1986. Spent formative years in Malta, a known node for Russian intelligence money and operations since the 1990s. Made multiple trips to Moscow in 2017 and 2018. Was appointed director of the White House Presidential Personnel Office, meaning he personally oversaw the selection and loyalty testing of approximately 4,000 executive branch appointments. He actively concealed his Soviet origins for months. When the New York Post asked where he was born, he said only, "Not Russia." The OCCRP and Times of Malta finally confirmed Tashkent through a notarized Maltese property document. He has since been moved, after a conflict with Elon Musk over personnel choices, to a new role as Special Envoy for South and Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, precisely the zone where the North-South corridor runs, precisely where Russian influence, Chinese investment, and American containment strategy all collide. Some people call this a demotion, but I call it a repositioning. Now, is Gore an FSB asset? I don't know. Nobody outside of a classified counterintelligence file knows. But here's what I do know. If you described this profile to any serious intelligence analyst, Soviet-born, Malta-connected, Moscow visiting, birthplace concealing gatekeeper of 4,000 government appointments, they would not shrug, they would open a file. The fact that Washington is not opening that file loudly and publicly is its own kind of answer. But let's give the administration its most generous possible interpretation. Let's say Gore is clean. Let's say Trump's silence on Putin are just strategic patience. Let's say the containment theory is real and being executed in good faith. There is still a problem, because the domestic architecture being built alongside this imperial strategy doesn't come from American strategic tradition. It comes from somewhere else. The Defense Production Act mobilizing GM and Ford for weapons. Automatic draft registration for 18 to 26-year-olds starting this December. ICE budgets exploding to $90 billion, not to catch immigrants, but to put uniformed federal forces on the streets of every major American city. $500 billion in data centers under Operation Stargate, a logic that says we cannot project empire abroad unless we suppress dissent at home. That is not Eisenhower's America. That is not Reagan's America. That is not even George W. Bush's America. That is the Putin model exported. Because here's what Putin actually built between 1999 and 2008. Energy leverage abroad, FSB surveillance state at home, managed democracy that keeps the form of elections while gutting their function, a loyal media ecosystem, and a personnel system where every significant appointment passes through security service vetting. What does that sound like to you? Two intellectuals, Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin, provided the American permission structure. Yarvin argued explicitly that democracy is a failed operating system and needs to be replaced by a CEO sovereign. Thiel funded the network, built Palantir, which is a surveillance infrastructure company, and said publicly that freedom and democracy are no longer compatible. These are American ideas, real American ideas. I am not dismissing them as foreign imports, but ideas are infrastructure, and someone who understood that infrastructure, someone who knew how to route and influence operation through existing ideological fault lines rather than creating new ones, could look at Yarvin and feel and say, "Perfect! I don't need to build this, it's already built. I just need to connect some wires." Putin didn't invent American authoritarianism. He just made sure it found its way to power. So here's where we land. The containment strategy is real. The imperial ambition is real. The money being spent, the factories being converted, the draft being prepared, all real. But the strategy cannot achieve its stated objective because Putin holds the escape key for China, and Trump will not take it from him. The domestic surveillance architecture being built alongside it isn't American strategic tradition. It's the Putin governance model dressed in MAGA clothing. And the man who spent 9 months deciding who fills 4,000 positions in the United States government was a Soviet-born, Malta-connected, Moscow-visiting operative whose origins he thought important enough to hide. You can call this coincidence. You can call it incompetence. You can call it useful idiocy. What you cannot call it is a coherent American grand strategy being executed in America's interest. Because the empire this is building, overextended, surveilled, isolated from allies, bleeding money into a war that serves no clear American objective, silent about every Putin move that undermines it, that empire has a destination. And that destination is not greatness. It's the dead end that someone very patient, very calculating, and very far from Washington has been building toward for a very long time. The trap didn't spring on America. America walked in, and someone left the door open. If you agree, hit like and subscribe. In either case, write in comments what you think. Let's take a look. Thanks to everyone who is financially supporting Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English on Patreon and directly here on YouTube. You are my heroes. You are listening and watching Rashkin Report Perspectives. My name is Yuri Rashkin, and freedom to all people.